Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Clay with Clay's AC and Auto Repair and Accurate Engines here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we're tackling another blown out rear shock tower on this Ford Escape. But what this video about today is the other side, the driver's side, where it gets little holes up inside there. We don't have to replace the panel, thank goodness. We do believe that once it gets a hole in there that it should last a number of 3 or 4 years before we see any significant problems. But we're going to try to get a little bit longer time out of this. If we did nothing, it probably would happen sooner. So if this video is helpful, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, click the notification, share my videos, and give me them sweet old thumbs up. And remember, if anyone else can do it, you can do it too. If you don't feel like doing this job yourself, you're more than welcome to send it down to Old Playboy. I'll certainly try to take care of it for you. We do an excellent job down there. And pretty soon, I'm going to be giving you a new video on how to do the passenger side that rust out, that gives you all the tips and tricks on how we do this. It's pretty extensive, but you can do it at home. When you find the sweet spot of this video that you're looking for, if it helps you out, please consider going to my homepage of my YouTube channel, putting on one of my sweet Clayway playlists, and turning the volume down and playing my videos all night long on your computer. That's how we get paid down here, that sweet 0.2 cents per view. It's ridiculous, but it does add up. Or at the very least, turn the volume down, start my video, and let it play from front to back. So here's what we got. To be able to do this the way that I'm going to do this time, I'm trying to think of ways that I can show you folks how to do this at home. In some situations, I would weld this in there. First thing that I'm going to use is I use this PLX 8-time. This is probably a little bit too much caulk for the small panel we're going to do, but that's how I have it inside the tube, so I'll do it last. Sawzall would work out excellent. You could also use a die grinder. And when you're just cutting the sheet of metal, which I'm going to explain to you here in a couple moments, you can use what's called a nibbler. I got this from Harbor Freight. That's pretty inexpensive. Works really well to cut panels out. And it does take a lot of metal out of there, so it does have a lot of waste to it. Using a Sawzall or a die grinder is going to have a lot less waste, but if you're not worried about it and this is the only thing that you're going to fix, that'll be great for that. I also use a wire wheel to clean up the glue that we're going to end up taking off, or possibly could end up taking off. And that's a 3/4 horse die grinder, and it will take the glue off that goes down below there with the wire wheel. But them things are about $100, so not necessary for you at home people that don't do very much of this. Just use your drill and a wire wheel, or your grinder or whatever. Grind that out of there. The next thing that we're going to use on here is we can go to the hardware store, and our local hardware store will have these. This is 22 gauge steel, and the reason that I use 22 gauge is it's a little bit more flexible than an 18 gauge. 18 gauge is really going to be thicker, and we're going to put one patch panel on each side, so one on the inside and one on the outside. The other thing that we're going to need is a face mask or goggles and a good old pair of gloves. The very last thing that you should always have, and it doesn't matter where you go, is a lighter, because you never know when you're going to have to burn something down, because it makes you really mad. Obviously, I'm just kidding. Don't go out setting fires. Then the last thing that I'm going to use is I use Rust-Oleum truck bed liner. I buy this because it's easy to use. It's in the spray can. Super simple stuff. It looks the same as this. There is something that's a little bit cheaper, and I do have it here somewhere. This is undercoating. Now, I don't use the undercoating as much as I use the truck bed liner. One, because the truck bed liner goes on there thicker, and we need to seal this up. So, I recommend the truck bed liner, even though it's a little bit more expensive. And if you want to get a little bit cheaper on the caulking, you can also use the PL 3-times. I've had success with that. It's not an issue. I just like the 8 a little bit better because it spreads out differently than the 3 will. But if you're just caulking up a small hole, you can certainly use the more inexpensive undercoating and the cheaper caulking, which is only about $4 a tube versus $8 a tube. 1, 2, 3. So I use self-drilling screws And this are sheet metal screws. You can use a 1 inch. In the video I actually used a 1 inch, but I had this 1.5 inch box sitting here. They are number 10 diameter screws. Remember, if you got a question for me, you can ask it on Clay's AC and Auto Repair on the Facebook Messenger. I can help you with your automobiles, or at least I try, but I can't help you with your baby mama drama. So after you remove the side panel, which quite simply just pops off of here, I pull the seal off of here, I pull the base plate off of here and things like that. Video's not so much about showing you how to take off a panel. If you can't take off a panel, this probably isn't the right job for you. But we're going to focus on this hole right here, and we're going to talk about why patching in this hole is not, it doesn't necessarily have to be replaced. And I'll show you the structure of this panel. Once I bought this aftermarket one, which I used for the other side. Only replaced a couple on the driver's side. Usually they're not that bad, so not that bad off. But where this pocket is right here is extremely thicker than the rest of the panel. So right here we've got like an 18 gauge steel on the normal portion, but when we get up here we actually have 2 pieces of 18 gauge steel, and the shock tower itself is actually made of a lot thicker steel. So when you go to cut this out of here and you cut a little bit of this out and you trim it back and everything like that, the only reason you're cutting out that rust is so it doesn't rust underneath your patch panel. You're going to try to get as much of that out of there as possible and replace it, and the glue will help you seal it back up right here. But we want to make this repair last for a little while, so I use the undercoating to spray the edges. And that's another reason that I'm showing you folks at home why we're not welding it in there. Because if we weld inside there, then that means we have to take a lot more metal back. And if we just put a panel in there to keep the elements away from the outside materials that could come up in here, water, salt, etc., we would have to get in there, and that could quite possibly make it to where we had to replace this panel. Now this panel is different than the other side, and these panels aren't ultra cheap to replace, but well worth it because the vehicles last hundreds of thousands of miles. They're an excellent drive line, and other than this problem, you might replace an alternator in this thing. If you have the V6 model, it might be expensive, but you'll get tens of thousands. I've got a couple with close to 300,000 miles on them with the V6, and I absolutely love them because they get around great and they're cheap to maintain. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start peeling back some of this old crusty stuff that's inside here, because we're going to replace a considerable amount of this anyways. So we'll get all this off of here. We're not going to go up into here very far, but we are going to knock all this down with our die grinder and try to patch this up to hopefully keep as much good solid metal as possible. I may use a screwdriver to chip some of this away to get it off of there. Now we can either start cutting this out of here, which is just fine, and then we can wire it down. Obviously I'm going to try to cut inside here, keep this lip right here as much as possible, and cut it up here. We got to remember where this line is right here, that's where our double frame, and we're probably not going to be able to cut through that with our Sawzall in this situation, or die grinder. So, or we could cut through it with our die grinder for sure, but on the back side of there is where that starts to double up and becomes that extra portion that, if you can remember, on the other side there. So we want to stay back here, cut behind that, so our panel fits up against here nice. So on this panel here, we have 2 screws that we're going to take out. It's actually held on by 3 screws. One's underneath there, and then a pushy up underneath here. We're going to remove this pushy and these 2 screws right here, which will make it easier for us to work on the panel. First, I'm going to use the Sawzall to cut back this loose, rusty material back here. Then I'm going to grab my die grinder and cut it a little bit finer with that. I'm going to eventually end up removing this piece of plastic out of here and getting to where I need to be. You can see how I scorched that with my die grinder. Now I'll cut it out the rest of the way. Now I'll just use my Sawzall and cut it down here square. Okay, so now I've got that off there just to make sure it's not still crumbly and I've got decently solid metal. I keep picking at it, and I'm probably going to take it and cut it back just a little bit and cut this elbow out of here. This is pretty thick up here, but it's a little bit thinner down here, and I'm going to try to get as much of this bad material out of here as possible. Then we'll start taking our wire wheel and clean off the surfaces of this area, so when we affix our new patch panel, it adheres there properly. Now, using my die grinder with the wire wheel, I'm going to take off all the loose rust and all the loose undercarriage coating. Now, once we've got that smoothed down and we've actually got metal exposed, we can go ahead and move on to the inside. Now, once we're on the inside, we can take our wire wheel and we can clear up most of this glue on this lip. This lip is about 1 inch high of actual steel underneath this glue, and we don't need to remove that glue there. We just need to grind back enough to where we have bare metal up around the edges. After taking this off of here, we notice that there's still a little bit of rust, so we're going to take that off as well. But this allows us to go ahead and put our panel over there and up there. Now we take a piece of cardboard and we spray the outer edges so we don't have overspray everywhere and our glue can affix to actual exposed bare metal. Repeating the process on the other side so our panel doesn't sit there and rust underneath our glue, etc., etc. Okay, so coming back to the outside, we've let that paint sit and dry for a little while, so hopefully we don't have any rust spots. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and measure the outside of our square, and I'm going to probably square this up, even though this isn't really square yet. I'm going to square it up, and we're going to cover over the top of this on the outside closest to the tire first, and I'll explain to you why when we go on the inside. I measured this. 5.5 would have put me right about here, but I measured 6 by 6. It was 5.5 this way, 5.5 this way, but I'm going to make it 6 by 6. Then that way when I go to put it down, I can bend it a little bit, because we're not going to be able to shape this exactly this way, but that's why we use the 22 gauge steel, because it will have some shaping to it. We'll see if it works. Now on my sheet of metal, I have a 6 by 6 area laid out, and I'm going to use my nibbler to go ahead and cut up on this piece of steel here. 2, 3. So now when we put this down here, I think what we're going to do is we're going to screw it here with our 1-inch screws and right here, and then we'll bend it around and put it in there. At least that's the hopes. We'll see how it works. Now I've taken and drilled the 1/8 hole, and then I put my self-tapping, self-drilling screw in there. Now I'm going to drill another hole down here and put another screw in there. Only thing I wish I would have done differently at this point was put the panel all the way down to the bottom edge of the original panel, so when I screwed it down, I could screw to the 1-inch lip that goes up from the bottom of the floor. Now taking my ball peen hammer, I'm going to start making the shape. And I'm going to dent it up a little bit so it makes a little curve right here before I put in my last screw on this edge. With that curve made the way I want, I'm going to put another screw right here, and it's going to be tough to drill through. Now we can keep shaping this out by putting a screw here and possibly a screw down here, and then working it with our hammer, get it to somewhat to where it's consistent, and eventually a curve that'll work for what we're trying to patch. Now we can hammer it into shape and start bringing it down. I wish I would have brung this edge down here a little bit further, so then I could have utilized the existing edge of material that was there to help make the curve. Wait till you see how this turns out. It actually turns out very well. Working from the right to the left, I just put in a screw, work my metal with my hammer, then put in another screw, working my metal to make my contour and my curve. It looks really nice when I'm done. So working from this direction over allows you to have these nice little curves and somewhat get this, you know, aesthetically pleasing. I use the 3 holes right here. It's very hard to drill through because, like I said, this is much thicker metal. But if you drill through there, you're going to end up being good. And if you quite didn't understand what I was saying, was the lip on the inside of this comes up 1 inch up off the floor, so off the base of here. So when you're drilling that hole and you're putting that screw in there, you can do that. Now, on the outside, it's pretty much done, except for we've got to truck bed coat over the top of it. Now we're going to go to the inside and do a little bit of finishing work on this. Now coming onto the inside, we can cut off all of our screw heads. Okay, so now that we've got the screws all cut off of there and they're not going to interfere with our panel, we can take and just caulk crap out of this stuff and make sure it seals up. I don't think I'm actually going to put a panel on the inside. I don't think it's going to be necessary. This is pretty good steel and it's pretty solid inside there. So other than painting over the top of it, once we seal it up with the glue or caulk or whatever the heck you want to call it, we should be good to go. And this panel should last us a number of years, or at least the rest of the lifetime of this vehicle. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put some glue on the outside. I wasn't going to do that, but I want to make sure that there's no way that we're going to get water on the inside of there, allowing this to rust more. And then we'll spray over the top of this with our bed liner and seal it up the rest of the way. Great. So once I applied this glue or caulk or whatever, I smear it around to make sure it gets underneath the cracks and crevices. It don't look as pretty after I smear it around, but it's going to turn out looking great when we're done. So now that it's dried for, you know, about an hour or so, it's still a little bit tacky, but not real bad. I'm going to go ahead and spray it and get the outside done, put my wheel back on. So I think the outside of it came out excellent and should give us many more years of use. So now we're going to step back on the inside, cover it with some bed liner as well, and then our task will be completed.
So we've got that all filled in with glue. We're going to lay down some of the bed liner, and she's all done. It's going to look great. It turned out looking awesome. I actually forgot to make video of that part, but I'm extremely satisfied how it turned out, and I know it'll give us many more years of use and extend the life of this panel. And as you can see, the passenger side turned out excellent, like they always do. I'm very comfortable with doing these. People bring them from up to 6 or 7 states away from Michigan here. Tennessee, Wisconsin, Minnesota, even had one come from Connecticut, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. So the next time you need one of these done, look me up. Send me a message on Clay's AC and Auto Repair on the Facebook Messenger. I'll quote you out. You'll be very pleased with the price of these. They're not that expensive. So that turned out awesome, and I'm extremely pleased with the way it looked. Remember, consider subscribing, clicking the notification, sharing my videos, and give me them sweet old thumbs up. Remember also, if anyone else can do it, I promise you, you can do it too. It's only a matter if you want to. If you've got a question for me, you can hit me up on Clay's AC and Auto Repair on the Facebook Messenger. I certainly try to help folks out with their automobiles. Sometimes I don't know it all. God bless and have the best of days.